But I know I was a Cub Scout leader. I coached my son's flag football team. I was a disaster, by the way. Whole team quit on me one time. But in the end, we had fun. I pitched 1,000 games of baseball to little kids over in the Duncombe School playground. The way it used to be. It looks completely different now. I don't go to the Duncombe School playground much anymore. But back then, they had a nice little diamond, and I must have pitched 1,000 games. What did you do out there, fathers and veterans? I'll narrow it to you. Yes, I am a proud veteran. And yes, as a matter of fact, I looked down my big old nose at those who didn't serve or scammed to get their way out or those sorts of things. That wasn't the way it was with me. Well, and to be honest, I didn't have the grades to get into college. And I don't think I had the money at the time either. So I needed that GI Bill. And the GI Bill helped me go to school so I could be on the radio. So it wasn't like I experienced what my dad or my son did. They were both wounded in combat. My dad twice. He's of course deceased now, but he had a Purple Heart with an Oakley cluster. That means you've been wounded more than once. And if you have 2 Oakley clusters, you've been wounded 3 times. He didn't have one of those, but I'm just explaining it to the non-veterans out there. My son also has a Purple Heart. He was standing in the back of a truck. They had just come back from arresting what they thought were terrorists, and they probably were. But it had rained in Iraq, and it didn't do that time of year. It was just overwhelming, blistering heat. And of course, these young Marines are dressed head to toe in protective armor and carrying packs and everything else. I can't imagine what that was like. But it had rained in Iraq, and it had softened up the road, the dirt road that they were on, or clay road, really. Now, just before it had rained, a terrorist had planted an IED, an explosive device, under the road. And then they'd wait. They paid an old grandfather in his late 50s. I'm a lot older than that. But they paid an old grandfather to sit in front of his house, and his house was right by the road. He'd sit there with a garage door opener, and that garage door opener ignited the bomb. So when my son and the prisoners and several other Marines drove by, the sun had hardened the road. Cars, military vehicles, Iraqi cars and vehicles driving back and forth after the rain had hardened the road, almost like concrete. So when my son and his fellows came along, fellow Marines, the old guy in front of his house detonated the bomb. Now, because the road was so hard and the bomb was planted before the rains, the explosion went up in a V pattern, and no one was killed. Had it not been for that rain and the hardening of the road, I'd be talking today about a son who had already been killed in combat. I just as soon never have that experience. I know many in our area had that experience of seeing a military priest or a minister come up to their door, and my heart goes out to them. I pray for them and their loss and the sacrifice of their son. Like a lot of veterans, there have been questions in my son's generation about whether it was all worth it. Of course, Biden has bravely withdrawn us from the Middle East. I love it when these privileged white men do things like this. Well, we're just going to get out of there. In other words, all of that sacrifice was for nothing. And you know what? These kids are in middle age now. They're middle-aged men. They look back on it and say, what has changed? Good question. Vietnam, my war, is a trading partner now. The George Bushes and Bill Clintons and Dick Cheneys of the world stayed home. Other priorities, Dick Cheney said. So, yeah, it's a little hard for me to respect them. It's a little hard for me to respect that sort of thinking, that entitled, privileged thinking. Bill Clinton, of course, addressed it by saying he despised the racist war in Vietnam. So he imposed on an Arkansas senator to keep him out of the service. I can't remember who the Arkansas senator's name was at the time, but he was very well known, liberal Democrat, of course. Didn't want the best and the brightest like old Bubba Bill there to have to go off to war. We'll just send these guys that can't afford to go to college, maybe aren't even too smart to go to college. We'll send them off and let them get killed and maimed, because that's the sharp, fair, and equitable thing to do. You got to tell that to all the mothers who saw that priest, saw that minister and that military officer coming up their sidewalk. Tell them that. Well, your son was sacrificed so Bill Clinton and George Bush and Dick Cheney could lead the world, so they could realize certain career ambitions. Jeez. Those people are now the Democratic Party, the great elders of the Democratic and Republican Party. So, I know my dad was very proud of his service. I am proud of mine. I know my son is proud, but all of us went into the service when we were 18, 19 years old. And we caught on to the game pretty fast. Oh, go up there. There's some unfriendlies up there. Go on up there. Yeah, you go up there. Shut up. I don't think I'm wrong to feel that way. I think a lot of veterans feel that way, especially of the last couple of generations. You want to talk about equitable? Let's make military service equitable. Rich kids, rich girls, all of them go. Everybody. A mandatory 2 years of service. Either that or you can go to the Peace Corps and show some villagers in Central Africa how to install indoor plumbing. But you should know some sort of sacrifice for your country that feeds you so well. What other country in the world would allow a relatively poor kid like Bill Clinton to flourish? What other country in the world? This is the greatest country in the world simply for its opportunity. And we have the opportunity because we made a conscious decision to break with kings and popes in old Europe. It seems like we have a new class of kings and poets. And they take and they take and they take. I talked with the old man about that over the weekend. Not in bitterness, although it sounds like I'm bitter, but just an acknowledgement that future fathers and mothers, if their son or daughter wants to go to the military, wonderful. I encourage that experience. I do to this day. But let's not be fooled. Let's not be fooled. They're there because the most prosperous in our society, the people who benefited most from our society refused to go, and they sent you in their place because they could. Let's not forget that. And no, it wasn't because it was a horrible racist war and we were imperialist forces and all that nonsense. It was simply cowardice. Face up to it. Come on. After all these years, we're old people now. You didn't want to go because it would interfere with your career. You didn't want to go because you might get hurt. So you arranged it so somebody else would go and get hurt. Let's knock all that off. And by the way, Let's quit pretending that there's a real difference in the political parties, because when it comes to customs and the things that we held close to our heart, in a sense of what is normal and what is not, those things have all been dismissed by the ruling class, and they can be Republican or they can be Democrat. Sorry, we'll redefine individuality itself. And now that you've made this sacrifice, we're going to lecture you on white supremacy. Of all the galling things in the world, I'm going to get a lecture on white supremacy. I want to tell you, black soldiers and white GIs, military men, were never closer than we were overseas, because we were the other. We were almost creatures from another planet, especially when we went in the jungle and ran into people who'd never seen anyone different from themselves ever in their lives. I think I mentioned before, the kids all ran in the jungle. I think the word that they used was pea. And pea meant ghost, as I recall, or spirit. They believed in spirits. At least they believed in something. At least they believed in something other than maintaining their cushy life. Well, that's what I thought of this Memorial Day. We must continue to learn, and we must be very suspicious of our leaders. Our leaders are ambitious people, and they don't want to let go. You know, Donald Trump said that clear into January and February. Or no, late December, I guess it was. It was before the riot. It wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't like they were toppling our democracy or anything, because Nancy Pelosi lost and was hiding in a closet somewhere. None of those things. None of those things. Anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed Memorial Day weekend. The weather was beautiful. Cooked out a few times. Talked to my old relatives and friends who've been gone for years and years. And I felt a sense of closeness with them all over again. We'll be back.
Michael Devine at AM 1400.
In the name of justice and the American way of life.
With 60 rounds of freedom.
It's 2:32. The news is next.
BC Powder knows life pushes us to the